Feasibility Study and Facilities Program for the Deaf Culture Center of New Mexico. Report number 3, Options and Implementation, May 2013. Contents: Introduction, Identify and compare site options, Select best site option, Develop implementation strategy. Report purpose: Provide a progress report, recommend short, mid, and long-term actions for the Deaf Culture Center of New Mexico. Land use priorities. This diagram shows the DCC priorities and how the land will be used. Priority 1, cultural and recreational uses. Priority 2, residential and commercial. Priorities 3 and 4, social services. Priority 5, educational. Land priorities. This diagram shows the different priorities, how many acres of land each would take, and what the percentage of the total land would be. Priority 1, cultural and recreational, 1.59 acres, 38.7%. Priority 2, residential and commercial, 1.37 acres, 33.3%. Priorities 3 and 4, service organizations, 0.59 acres, 14.5%. Priority 5, educational, 0.55 acres, 13.4%. 4 acres would accommodate all of the priorities. The minimum size for Priority 1 is 0.65 acres. The best size for Priority 1 is 1.6 acres. Combining residential, commercial, cultural, and recreational uses creates a deaf center. Total site area needed to accommodate all priorities is 4 acres. This diagram shows each priority and how many acres it would take to accommodate them. Facility space needs. This diagram shows the percentage of space that each of the priorities would need in a building. Priority 1, the Culture Center and Multipurpose Room. Priority 2, housing. Priorities 3 and 4, service organizations. Priority 5, educational. Site, or land space needs. This diagram shows a percentage for each priority of how much space each would need on the property. Priority 1, Cultural Center and Multipurpose Room. Priority 2 is Housing. Priorities 3 and 4, Service Organizations. Priority 5, Educational. Options for acquiring the land. Number 1, request the money from the legislature. The timeline and total cost are unknown. To use PCD-owned land. This is a simpler process. There would be no need to acquire special funding. It would have a shorter startup duration. Number 3, occupy space in an apartment building. The developer buys the land and builds the apartments. DCC can rent space on the ground floor at a low cost. Considerations for each option. Can DCC obtain money to buy land? How easily can DCC get funding? Can DCC complete all of its goals? What are the advantages and disadvantages? For option 1, getting money from the state legislature. Funding was not available in 2013 and might not be available in 2014. Having state funding would allow the DCC to complete its plans. However, DCC does not meet the extensive list of requirements for state funding. Option 1, continued. This diagram shows all of the state funding requirements. A state grant should be the resource of last resort. A state grant should eliminate risk or hazard to public health or safety. A state grant should satisfy agency mandates or legislative actions. A state grant can be completed with the requested funds. It should support a necessary government function. It should advance the state's economy. it should serve more than 60% of the state's population or all of the customers within a political subdivision. A state grant should be used to obtain other funds, resources, or partnering relationships. It should reduce operating costs through savings or efficiencies. It should be listed in Agency Infrastructure Capital Improvement Plan. It should have the support from other legislators. Site Option 2. Using land that PCD already owns. Funding is not needed because the state already owns the land. This option would allow DCC to complete its plans if PCD allows a developer to buy a portion. The land is big enough for all the priorities. There is a good possibility that DCC could complete its plan, but the developer may not prefer the location. Another negative is that the location might not be convenient. Site Option 2. Using PCD-owned land. Funding was not available in 2013. It probably won't be available in 2014. DCC probably can complete its plans if enough money becomes available. A positive is that the land might be big enough for all the priorities. A negative is that DCC does not currently meet the requirements for state funding. Another negative is that DCC and CDHH would have little control over the location. Site Option 3. Renting space in an apartment building. Funding would not be necessary because the developer will buy the land. The project can begin soon. One positive is that it is very possible that DCC can complete its plans and a developer is already interested. Another positive is that the location is convenient. It has good visibility and it would be inexpensive for the DCC. One negative is that the location does not have enough space for all of DCC's goals. Potential site locations. This map of Albuquerque shows all of the options and where they're located. Number 1, APS land at Eubank Southeast. Number 2, state-owned land near Gibson and Yale. Three A, city-owned land at 4th and Cole. 3B are the rail yards. Site 1 strategy. APS land at Eubank Southeast. This land is currently owned by APS. It is large enough for all of DCC's priorities. The land cost is $1.5 million. Strategy timeline. In the short term, DCC would have to wait for the legislature to approve funds. PCD would issue a request for proposals, RFP, for the land. This can be a slow process. PCD coordinates with the developer for simultaneous and separate land purchase. In the midterm, the developer will build and lease residential and commercial spaces. DCC would have to begin fundraising for construction of Priority 1 spaces at the same location. For the long term, other phases would be built as funds become available. Site 2 strategy. State-owned land near Gibson and Yale. These two properties are owned by PCD. They're large enough so that all priorities would fit on those sites. PCD would negotiate with the developer to use one of the sites. Strategy timeline. In the short term, DCC and the developer will negotiate with PCD for land. The developer would build and lease residential and commercial parts on one site. DCC would rent some space in the housing project temporarily. In the midterm, DCC would need to raise money to build Priority 1 spaces on the other site. In the long term, Priorities 1, 3, 4, and 5 will be built as funds became available. Site 3 strategy, using city-owned land at 4th and Cole. This property has good access and visibility for a DCC headquarters. The land is available for the developer to purchase. It's well suited for residential, commercial development. The site is only large enough for residential and commercial uses. Strategy timeline. In the short term, DCC can rent space at the housing project as a temporary headquarters. They can start with a minimum spaces needed. DCC can develop their capacity to raise funds and promote future DCC campus. In the midterm, DCC can work with the City of Albuquerque to develop the future DCC campus at the proposed railroad's redevelopment. DCC will raise money through a multi-year project of fundraising. DCC would need to continue to lobby the legislature for more funding. In the long term, DCC would be able to construct a full culture center at the rail yards. Characteristics of a favorable site. The land should be large enough to hold all the space needs. The site should be close to daily living needs. Funding should exist for DCC to build its Priority 1 Culture Center spaces. DCC should be available to move into the facility soon. Site option comparison. This diagram compares all three options. Option 1, purchase land. Option 2, use PCD land. Option 3, rent from the apartment building. The gray color shows an unknown possibility. Red shows a low possibility. Yellow shows a medium possibility. Green shows a high possibility. Probable timeline for each option. This diagram compares all three options with a possible timeline for when they will be completed. Option 1, using money from the state legislature, starting today in 2013, the DCC would probably not be able to move into a facility until the year 2021. Option 2, using PCD state land. DCC would probably not be able to move into a new facility until the year 2019. Option 3, renting offices at the apartment building. DCC would probably be able to move into the facility as early as 2016. Option 3 provides the fastest, most direct way to complete the project. Preferred site. Option 3 meets most of DCC's priorities. This map shows the downtown location of the apartment building and parks, libraries, schools, and transportation that are nearby. Option 3 satisfies most of DCC's priorities. The developer can acquire land in 2013. Construction and move-in can be completed by early 2016. It's within walking distance to transportation and services. It's located in a qualified census tract. This means that a large portion of the building can be used for commercial purposes. It is eligible for low-income housing tax credits. No funding is needed by the DCC for the construction phase. DCC will need to pay for improvements to DCC offices. Option 3 satisfies most of DCC's priorities. There will be a visible DCC presence, and this will improve the fundraising potential. Using private money will help to obtain public funding. The project's completion will show that DCC is organized and able to raise money and handle money. This will establish a critical mass of deaf people at one location. This makes the deaf community more visible and increases efficiency for services. Starting with priority 1 spaces now is better than waiting for an ideal culture center to be built later. Partnering with a private developer saves DCC money. Option 3 meets low-income housing tax credit requirements. It increases the possibility of a successful tax credit application. The project will serve underserved deaf people. It will provide programs for deaf people on site. The city is an active partner. The project contributes to improved socioeconomic conditions in the neighborhood. This site is in a metropolitan redevelopment area. This project could encourage more redevelopment projects. One negative aspect of option 3 is that the site is not large enough to fit all of DCC's priorities. The property can only accommodate cultural and recreational spaces. That's priority 1. Long-term strategy, the Rail Yards project. DCC could eventually move to the rail yards. This project is a partnership between the City of Albuquerque, which owns the property, and a private developer. They are creating a master plan and implementation strategy. DCC could become another partner in this project. Probable timeline. DCC, CCM, and the City of Albuquerque each bring many advantages to this project. Partnering increases the likelihood of success. The diagram shows a timeline with short-term, 2 to 3 years, mid-term, 4 to 10 years, and long-term, 10 plus years goals. Development concept. The property is located at 4th Street and Cole Avenue. Additional vacant land might also be available. The site size is 0.68 acres. It would have 38 parking spaces. It would have an outdoor courtyard space. This could be a 4-story building. Development concept, ground floor. The ground floor would have commercial spaces for rent, where the DCC can also rent office space for a low rent. In this diagram, the brown spaces would be used by the DCC. Olive green spaces would be shared with apartment residents. The green spaces would be used only by the apartment residents. The purple spaces could be rented out for businesses. Development concept, second floor. These would be apartments for families, individuals, and senior citizens. 1 and 2 bedroom apartments would be available. Development concept, third and fourth floors. These apartments would only be for senior citizens. 1 and 2 bedroom apartments would be available. Facility aesthetics. The facility should be attractive. It should be in harmony with surrounding buildings. It should incorporate residential and architectural elements. It should improve the neighborhood's visual appeal. (3D) design concepts. These images show what the building could possibly look like. The first one is a view from the northeast corner. The second one is a view of the courtyard and main entrance. (3D design concepts). These images give aerial views of the proposed building. The first one is an aerial view from the south. The second is an aerial view from the northeast corner. The next one is a view of the southeast corner. The last one is a view from the south. Cost in the short term. The DCC will work with housing project partners. DCC will support the application for housing tax credits. The DCC will assist with design, site development, and construction once the tax credits are awarded. The developer pays most of the costs, but DCC will pay its own rent and will pay for office improvements. Office improvements will cost about $200,000 for 4,400 square feet of space. The City of Albuquerque might provide some grants to improve the office spaces. Cost in the midterm. DCC will have to pay operational costs after they move in. Estimated operational costs include paid staff, 2 persons at $15 per hour plus benefits would be around $83,000 per year. DCC will have to pay rent, 4,400 square feet at $2 per square foot. That's about $9,000 per year. It will probably be difficult to find funding assistance. DCC must improve the capability to fundraise. cost in the long term? Fundraising for a full culture center will require a major effort for a multi-year capital campaign. This diagram shows capital cost estimates by priority and how much each priority would cost to build. Priority 1 would cost around $4.22 million. The cultural priority would cost about $1.72 million. The recreational priority would be $2.5 million. Priorities 3 and 4 together would cost about $3.48 million. That's for the social services. For priority 5, educational, it would cost around $2.54 million. Existing DCC funds. CDHH has funds from the legislature to help create the DCC. Session 12, 1284, was $200,000. This funding expires on 6/30/2016. Session 12, 1558, $20,000. This funding expires on 6/30/2014. DCC should soon appropriate 12/1558, the funds that expire next year. Consider using those fees to design the DCC offices to rent. 12/1284 funds could be used to construct office improvements in the apartment building. Funds not used before expiration dates have to be returned to the state. Summary. The land located in downtown Albuquerque is the most feasible option. This option combines a small DCC with an apartment building and commercial space to create many parts of a deaf culture center. This option can be constructed quickly, with move-in as soon as early 2016. The DCC will have no construction costs except interior improvements to the offices they rent. The DCC will be responsible for operational costs, such as the low rent, staff salaries, and maintenance. The DCC could build a larger facility in the future that would require a major sustained capital campaign for fundraising.